Hello all you beautiful people out there, what is going on? This is your friend Britik coming at you fast with some map testing footage of the up and coming Paragon 2 game known as Core. You guys have been following my news on this channel, and for that I am very thankful. You can rest assured that I will keep it locked on the Core and the predecessor and anything else that is Paragon 2 worthy material here on this channel. So if you do enjoy this video, it did take me a minute to create, and I would really appreciate a like on it. So first we're going to analyze map A. We're just going to go over what we see here. This is mid lane right here. This is the position of the two river buffs. Then we're going to analyze map B, and then at the end we're going to see a side-by-side comparison, and we're going to talk about the pros and cons of each one and which one I prefer more. So on every side here you have the two platforms next to the inhibitors. In map A, these platforms are kind of separated. It's not one big platform, but it does provide nice verticality. This is the solo lane for some verticality here, or the duo lane. They both look the exact same way, so it really just depends on how it's going to end up looking in the final game. But right now I'm just running through all the lanes. I like how the solo lane and duo lane are spaced out. They're spaced out very well. They also have quite a bit of elevation. They have ledges next to the towers. They also have little bits of shadow pools. So those purple blocks that you see there, the purple rectangles on the ground, those are shadow pools. And I like how they have little bits of them in the lane. They kind of function like bushes in League of Legends, because you have bushes and lanes in League of Legends. And that's an interesting concept for sure. Map A is more original than map B, as you guys will see. But now let's go ahead and take a look inside the jungle. So the green vertical rectangles that you guys see there, in the real game, those are going to be places that you can't jump over. So even though I can jump over them right now, you won't be able to jump over them in the game. The purple are fog walls, and the blue walls are walls that are kind of like fog walls, but that are on top of terrain that you can jump over. So you can jump over that terrain, you can pass that blue wall, but you can't see through it. And right now here is the main side of a jungle, okay? We see there's a blue buff in here. Probably going to be red buff instead of blue buff is what I was told. There's plenty of ledges, plenty of verticality. You can jump on top of these ledges and jump from one to the other to try and gank the lanes. However, as you guys saw there, I couldn't clear it with just one regular jump. This movement speed is going to be the same exact movement speed as it is in-game. And unless I'm Kallari or Wukong or a hero that has mobility like that, I can't clear that distance. And this is one of my gripes with this jungle, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in the comparison part of this video. Right now I'm kind of just showing you guys around. Here's a fog wall, here's another one of those ledges that you have to use a double jump to clear. And by the way, if you haven't noticed, Kallari's kit got a little reworked, and this is how they plan on keeping her kit until we get into the full game. They brought her old ult back, which I was very happy about. And instead of a double jump, they incorporated a triple jump, where spacebar is just a regular jump, and the Q button is now her double jump. So you can actually jump 3 times with Kallari. The jumping that you see here is not going to be representative of how high you can go in the real game. They just did that so it's easier to move around. So there's a few camps there in the main side jungle. Here is the Remnant Pit. So Remnants are going to be like the new Fangtooth. Here's the Remnant Pit in map A, and here is the dunking spot for Orb Prime. Orb Prime dunking is back, it's going to return, and this is the spot that they have in this map. And because this is a test, I'm able to fly up and show you guys a nice little overview. As you can see, there are 2 minion camps on both sides that are very close to the middle there that should be easy to steal. And then as you go deeper inside the camp, you have the buff, you have a harvester there, and of course both sides are going to be symmetrical. So this is the strong side jungle. This is where you would have green buff on Monolith jungle, for example. This is where you have the majority of your camps. This is the strong side jungle, and this is where you should spend most of your days. It's very symmetrical, as you guys saw there. And here's the old ult, and there's these ledges. So there's these ledges where if you have a traversal mechanic like Kallari does, you can actually jump into the Remnant Pit from these ledges. I personally put in an idea of just making them complete bridges and just making the wall lower, so if you're someone like Kallari, you can jump through the back, but then any other hero can just run up on those ledges. I kept making a reference to Grux, who doesn't have a jumping ability, when I was running around this jungle. As you see, there's a camp right here. And then you run around. There's a ledge here with a fog wall inside the jungle. And there's also a nice little fog shadow pool right there next to the buff. So same exact thing as the other side. Now here is the weak side jungle, which you can get through from mid lane. And there's a lot of openings inside the jungles. There's not just one way to go from mid to jungle or jungle to mid. There's like 3 or 4 different openings. So here we see a harvester next to red buff, more fog walls, more shadow pools. Again, none of this is going to be concrete, and I'll talk about that when I compare the two maps. But here is where Orb Prime is going to be, so it's exactly symmetrical when it comes to Orb Prime and Remnant placement. As you guys can see here, there's some verticality. There are some ledges here on the sides, which should make for some interesting Orb Prime fights. But honestly, I prefer the Orb Prime pit on map B, as we'll see here. Also, you can go invisible as Kallari again, but we all know that. Again, these green walls are just things that you normally wouldn't be able to jump over, but because I'm able to fly and stuff, I can go over them and make sure that I test everything properly. So as you guys see here, the layout of the camps is pretty spaced out. It's pretty spaced out, offering a good amount of rotation, but the distance between the camps is pretty far, it's pretty wide. And the openings to Orb Prime Pit and Remnant Pit, there's only really one main opening, and then there's those ledges on the sides where, like I said, if you're Kallari, you can jump over the walls. If you're not, then you're kind of shit out of luck and you have to use the main entrance, and it's going to be more of a choke point. Some people like that. Some people want only one entrance into Orb Prime Pit, so then you really have to commit to a team fight. But I think there's other ways to do it and still be able to commit to a team fight. So in lane, this is what I'm talking about. You had that verticality, and you have the bushes there like League. You have the shadow pools there against the side, so you can place wards and stuff in them. And here are multiple entrances into the lane from the jungle. So you can come up this ramp, you can come up through the middle ramp. These side ramps don't have fog walls in this build of the map, so I could see that being useful. And then in the middle, the mid lane, you can come into the mid lane by using ledges and jumps, kind of like this one right here. You can go into the mid lane and use those ledges and jumps to get into the mid lane, like I kind of showed in the beginning of the jungle portion in this video. So rewind if you missed those ledges, but those ledges are spread out all over the place. There was another one right there. I just turned to the left, but there was one right there going towards the mid lane. And here I show you another overview of this side of the jungle. Harvester, red buff, couple camps, and then you see the mid river buff. I don't like the river buff placement, but we'll talk about that later. And then there's plenty of ledges to go from jungle into mid lane when you're ganking. So that's map A. Here's map B. And map B, which you can see in the top left, by shape, by size, by function, reminds me a lot of Legacy. You see these platforms here to the sides. These are the same platforms that were used. And we're going to run down the middle here. It reminds me a lot of Legacy. You guys will see. River buffs are a little more spaced out. There are no fog walls. River buffs are a little more spaced out. I really like the river buffs here, this location. As we go through the mid lane, you'll see that the towers are also a bit more spread out than they were in map A. I would prefer if they were zigzagged a little bit like they were on Legacy to increase the distance between towers. And I think that would be perfect. But again, remember, these ledges next to these inhibitors, they were broken up in map A. The completely one unit in map B. A lot of verticality here, very steep kind of hill going up to the inhibitor. You have shadow pads on the ledges like you did in Legacy. And here's very, 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 very prominent memory of the 1v1 lane in Legacy. The shadow pad at the bottom with the stairs coming up around the sides reminded me a lot of Legacy. Again, we're going to the dual lane now. The two lanes are symmetrical, really, so it doesn't really matter which way is the dual lane. The lane that's closer to red buff will be the dual lane, because remember, red buff gave damage, and you want the damage on your ADCs. Again, here I'm just jumping onto these platforms to show the verticality, shadow pad, and verticality. Multiple entrances into jungle. Mid lane, or I'm sorry, not mid lane. The shadow pad linking the jungle to this lane, just like you had in Legacy. So very, very similar stuff here. There's a few key differences, though. There are a few key differences, mainly the jungle, the way the harvester is set up, the way it's rotated, the way the camps are spaced out. That is definitely very different. Of course, river buffs were not a thing on Legacy, but they are now. So they're spread out interestingly as well. And here we have the Orb Prime Pit. Does this look familiar? Does this look familiar? It should, because this is the same exact ore prime pit that was in Legacy. You have the 2 ledges with the shadow pads, you have the ore prime pit sunken into the ground a little bit, and I think it's perfect this way. This is the ore prime pit that I want to see in the final build of the game. I think that's the best way to do it. You have 2 entrances, and you have a wall around the back that you can jump over. And then you have river buff here on the other side, and it's nice and spaced out, so if you were to ward river buff, you wouldn't be able to get any ward into the ore prime pit. Well, you would be able to get ore prime pit a little bit if you have a radius ward, but you wouldn't be able to ward prime himself. You couldn't put a ward right on top of prime because the radius should be small. And here's the remnant buff. Again, this is going to be instead of Fangtooth, and this is placed very similarly to how black buff was placed initially on Legacy. And here's the ore prime dunk spot. We're going to talk about that a little later. But again, this is very similar to how black buff was. It's a little more spaced out, a little bit of a wider area, of course, because this is going to be a bigger buff than black buff was on Legacy. You have these perches, these ledges for verticality and gameplay. And then you have, again, I call this the solo lane, because remember the, well, actually, I think the 1v1 lane was closer. No, the duo lane was closer to black buff. The 1v1 lane was next to ore prime pit. So I guess if you want to say that's the duo lane where I just was. And then the 1v1 lane was the other one. But here's the weaker side of the jungle. You have blue buff here. You have a lot of verticality and a good little bit of maze here. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of both these maps here shortly. But you have another camp down here. And then you have a camp out here. Not out here, but you have a camp out here. If I keep going, that's closer to the middle. So I'm about to drop off this ledge here. I'm showing you guys a ledge that you can drop into middle or just keep going to the jungle. So here's that camp that's closer to the middle that you could steal, just like in Legacy. You could steal that camp pretty easily. And then again, you can jump off from these ledges and gank if you wanted to. You could drop down into the sides right here if you wanted to. A little bit of clipping, but of course it's a map test. That's the whole point. It's the whole point of it. That's what you want to do. Red buff is right here. Nice little framework of pathways. Not, in essence, the most perfect jungle, but pretty cool nonetheless. Again, we'll talk about that in a second. And you have harvesters in here as well. And the harvesters are a little bit closer to the lanes. You have mid lane, be very close to that blue side harvester, and then you have the dual lane, or whatever side lane. Okay, we're just gonna call it the side lane. You have this side lane closer to this harvester. See, it opens up right there into this side lane right away. So you just walk in there as a support character, go in, pick up that harvester, and then that is now your job to guard that harvester as well as the jungler's job. So a lot of team play going on there. And then here's a camp here and the entrance to the jungle right there. So this is basically a summary of this map. Again, you guys can get a better look at it if you join my live streams, but if you have no idea what these maps look like, now you do. This is essentially what it is. And of course, each side is exactly symmetrical. So this side of the jungle is the exact same as the other person's side of the jungle. And then this blue side of the jungle is the exact same as the other person's blue side. So as you can see here, less camps on this side, more camps on the red buff side. But this part of the jungle is also smaller and closer to that side lane, and this jungle is a bit bigger and a bit more spread out, but not as spread out as map A's. Definitely a smaller jungle on map B than in map A. Okay, so that's basically the overview here. Now let's go ahead and compare the two. Yeah, as we run into the sunset. Yeah, go ahead and compare the two. So map A, pros and cons, right? Map A, pros and cons. Map A is on the left of your screen right now, map B is on the right. Map A, I think the side lanes are spaced out really well, but the mid lane is very, very cramped, as you guys see there. On map B, the mid lane is not as cramped. And what I mean by that is that the towers are spaced pretty well on map B, but on map A, they are not spaced well at all. Also, the river buffs placement on map A is really bad. You don't want to have it be so easily accessible to the mid laner. You definitely want to push it out more into the jungle like map B has it, so that the junglers can contest it. And it also needs to be behind some sort of wall, some sort of fog wall. I'll talk about my idea on shadow pools and fog walls in a minute. And in essence, I just prefer map B. Like overall, if I had to choose one to play right now, I would choose map B. So take all the good stuff that I said about map B, right? The lanes are good. The mid lane is all right, but it definitely needs some zigzag to it, like Legacy had it, to space out the towers a little bit more. I love the Ore Prime pit. I like the Remnant pit. The jungle is my only main gripe with map B. And the fact that the jungle seems a little too mazy. I want the jungle to be a little bit more of an open space so you can have team fights in the jungle as well, like you could in Monolith, right? The jungles in Monolith were pretty spaced out, but at the same time, there was archways and there was passageways that you can use for verticality and go through in order to make for some interesting team fights and combat. The jungle from map A is pretty good, but I think it's too spaced out. I don't think either jungle is perfect. But I think if you took the jungle from map A and put it into the size of map B, because map B is a little bit smaller when it comes to the lateral, to the left and right, to the width of the map. It is a bit skinnier than map A. What you can then do is fit map A's jungle into a smaller area in map B, and then kind of get rid of all those ledges in between that make for those long rotation times, but also keep some ledges and keep some archways that would make for good team fights and good verticality. I don't know how to do that specifically. That's up to game design, but that's essentially what I would want. Take the jungle from map A, put it into map B, and get rid of some of the stuff in between so heroes like Grux, who can't jump over everything 24/7, can still rotate pretty efficiently. Now, another thing that I want to see in map B is I like the shadow pools. I'm glad they have the shadow pools, but also I want there to be fog walls. Now, in the very beginning, when I started map testing, I was completely against having both. I wanted either fog walls or either shadow pools, one or the other, but you can't have both. After testing a little bit and seeing how these maps lay out, I came to a conclusion that it is possible to have both. You could have shadow pools be in the jungle only, and you could have fog walls be between lanes only. So on map B right here where I'm in the shadow pad, instead of that shadow pool right there, have a fog wall instead, and just keep the shadow pools inside the jungle. I think that would work way better than having a ridiculous amount of fog walls like in map A, and then also having those fog walls inside the jungle. I don't like fog walls inside the jungle. I think shadow pools would make more sense. Why would it make more sense? Well, I'll get to that in just a second. But the last thing I want to talk about was these dunk spots. I don't like these dunk spots. I want the dunk spots to go back into the opposite lane how they were in Legacy, where you would take Ore Prime and then you would run all the way across the map into enemy territory between their tier 1 and their tier 2 tower in order to dunk it and get the full benefits. I think that's way better. Having these middle spots, these middle dunk wells for that objective makes it a little too easy to defend against, especially since there's like 4 or 5 ways, or makes it hard to defend against because there's 4 or 5 ways. It all depends on your situation, but it could be way too easy, let's say, for an enemy team to sneak that into the orb spot, into the orb dunk spot, because there's 4 different entrances into the Remnant pit on map B, for example. And it's just not efficient. You need one solid point in the corner of the map that's easily defendable. You need to make that team work for their bonus. They're already getting one individual super buffed up by carrying that Orb Prime buff, so that should balance things out. The defensive side should have an advantage when it comes to location. Now, going back to my idea about shadow pools and fog walls. I ran this idea by game design, and they're going to be talking about it. I also ran this idea by the lore team. What if that liquid that is in the shadow pools that makes you invisible is actually a liquid that runs through this planet? What if it's like molten lava that runs through rock? Well, you can have that molten lava, that liquid, flow through the rocks on this map and come out of them in the form of waterfalls. You could have archways next to lanes, and this fluid just drips on down, making a wall, but also it stays relevant to the lore. Instead of calling them shadow walls, you can call them shadow falls. So you have shadow pools in the jungle and shadow falls in between lanes. You guys kind of understanding what I'm saying? The water drips down and makes a wall, and then the cracks in the earth absorb that liquid, and it just makes for a nice fluid waterfall. Let me know what you guys think about it in the description below. Let me know which map you guys prefer. And like I said, if I had to choose one of the maps to play right now for alpha or closed alpha testing, or closed alpha in general, it would be map B. That's my preferred option. I'm settling on map B. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, drop a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, make sure you have a wonderful day.